don't envy you.
Ready?
I don't envy anyone in this situation.
Let's call this meeting to order.
Let's go.
Call the school meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd first like to recognize Westwood Media Center, who would be live streaming the meeting. Will also be recording for future viewing. Anyone else looking to record tonight? Great, thank you. I would turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, appreciate it. Just as we begin this evening, I wanted to just share a few things. Last week was Inclusive Schools Week in the Westwood Public Schools, and so I just wanted to share a couple of things that were done. The theme of Inclusive Schools this week was Draw Me In. One thing I don't have any pictures of because there was not a great way just because of the hallways, but if you actually leave this room and walk up the hallway towards the main office of the high school, you'll see the art collaboration between our high school students and our preschool students, which is great to see, so I'd encourage people to do that. So there were a couple of, I'm just going to show you photos of a couple of murals that were produced. So as I mentioned, the theme for the week this week was Draw Me In, about a pathway to self-discovery and sharing art to respect different ways of thinking. So this is the mural that was produced at Martha Jones. Just wanted to kind of show what that looks like. This is a kind of a close-up look at part of that mural where students created different parts of the mosaic to put that together. So it's a great thing. This is one put together by second and third graders at Sheehan. So again, wanted to share some of the work of our students there. I also want to take a moment and specifically acknowledge our Westwood High School being recognized as a National Unified Champion School through Special Olympics due to our work in really supporting our unified basketball program, unified track program. It's great stuff and really speaks to the inclusive environments that we have here in Westwood. So happy to kind of start by celebrating that and sharing some of the great things we do for kids here in the system. Just before I go into the other parts of the presentation, I do want to mention we are in that time of the year in the holiday season where we have presentations and concerts and all those sorts of things. So the string concert was a couple of weeks ago. I was able to make that. The band concerts were earlier this week. Unfortunately, the timing of the building committee meeting last night meant that I arrived just as it ended, the 5th and 6th grade band concert last night. But there's a chance to see the choral concerts next Monday and Tuesday. So wanted to put that out in the ether for everybody to come see. Moving to a different part of the superintendent's report, I wanted to talk briefly about where we are with the facilities RFQ. I am happy to, as I've talked about before, share that there were $500,000 allocated by the select board from ARPA money to conduct a shared procurement with municipal government around the facilities RFQ. And just to be clear, while it's a shared procurement, we're looking to hire the same architect. There will be separate deliverables. Hopefully, we'll be able to work with a firm that has enough capacity to do both simultaneously. But if not, there's an understanding that the school RFQ deliverables need to come first. And I just wanted to share, and we had discussed this as a capital subcommittee a couple of weeks ago, so thank you to Dory and Maya for your time and feedback on that. That the key phases of the school plan would be, and some of these happen simultaneously, this is not necessarily sequential phases, just to be clear about that. As with any sort of study like this, you need to establish some project goals. It's important that we look at analyzing enrollment projections, and I think there's a value in having a third-party enrollment projection be done as part of this. There's some firms that specialize in this that can give us a greater level of detail than I think we've had historically. Obviously, a key part for any kind of capital plan is assessing the existing building conditions, getting into buildings, talking with principals, talking with facility staff, talking with other folks to get in there and see that. That third bullet is the part that we would be looking for whatever firm it is to contract out for the development of an educational vision and the inclusive process that I talked about as part of our entry plan. Once you have the vision, you've assessed the building conditions, then you can look at developing the ed program and master plan options that look out over a span of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years potentially, just to kind of show what the impact of decision points are along the way. And then preparing and drafting final reports. They would assist with community presentations, and if applicable, would assist us in developing a statement of interest for the MSBA. Not surprisingly, I mean, the MSBA board met last week. We had continued to submit for the Sheehan School. While we're still in the middle of Pine Hill, the Sheehan, SOI did not get moved forward. That's not necessarily a shock, but we want to make sure, and part of the reason we're doing this is so we can be in better stead when it comes time to potentially submit to the MSBA in the future. The two key real target dates for our work for sort of public-facing completion of various parts of this here is to have our educational visioning completed by June of 2024. The purpose for that is to make sure it would allow us to develop our bridge strategy for next school year so that we can continue in our efforts, our improvement efforts for the district, and would also support our timeline to develop a new overall longer range district strategic plan in FY25. The second key deliverable is to make sure that our master plan options and the capital work is done and completed and socialized by October of 2024. The reason for that is it provides clarity for capital needs and development of our FY26 budget. That's around the time when we're submitting our budget requests to the town as the overall capital plan, and would also support our submission of a revised SOI to the MSBA in early 2025. So those are the key target dates. We had an initial meeting with municipal folks last week around developing the RFQ. I think they're certainly comfortable with our approach on this. Ball is kind of in a shared court right now. We need to do some work on fleshing out the educational part of what we're looking for. They need to do some work on how they can develop a similar kind of construct with their look at municipal buildings. But based upon our conversation, I'm very, very optimistic that we'll be able to hit these deliverable dates as we move forward. So I just want to pause there for a second if there are any questions or comments from anybody on the committee on this particular item.
I had a question about the MSBA application. Is there guidelines? Having not been a part of this committee when we were submitting for Pine Hill, do they give guidelines or feedback, or your application is more attractive if you've gone through a facilities plan like this, or anything like that that we can, make sure we're doing as we prepare to continue to apply every year?
Yeah, so I'll offer my two thoughts, and I'll turn to others on the committee if they have similar thoughts. Do they formally offer any feedback? No. Are there, kind of based upon patterns for what they put through the pipeline, based upon conversations that happen, certainly, and I can say from my own personal experience, right? I had, in my former life, we had done a master facilities plan where we had never had one before. We submitted our first ever statement of interest for our high school project in early 2013 and got into the pipeline on our first try. I know there are other communities that having gone through this planning process, it has certainly helped their submission of an SOI. And I think part of that is the MSBA, for understandable reasons, doesn't want to invite a district into eligibility unless they are, pretty certain that a project is going to come out at the end of it, because otherwise they're investing money in supporting a feasibility and other things like that that doesn't have a tangible outcome at the end. So this will definitely, let me rephrase that, because I don't want to say anything with 100% certainty, but it's certainly my opinion that having this plan in hand will put us in better stead for the submission of an SOI as we move forward. I don't know if anybody else on the committee has any thoughts around this, but.
No, I agree with that. I mean, we had a similar pattern, right, where we did our feasibility study in 2015. We applied in 2017 on the heels of that feasibility study and got in on our first try. So we had a similar scenario.
I was going to say, there's a neighboring district who actually had an elementary school built within the last 10 years, and they did a similar study, and they actually just got invited in for a middle school. So I think there is good precedent.
Thanks.
Anything else on this topic? All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Allison to talk about STAR reporting. Yeah, I'll just turn it over to you, and you can kind of jump in.
Great. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. This sort of says what I already sent out via memo, but I just wanted to kind of give you an update about where we are with this particular assessment tool, kind of, and where we think we're going. So just as a little background information, this is one of a number of different possible assessment tools that are out there in the universe, and a reasonable question is why pick this one? And when we did pick it, which is a few years back, really it was for the following reasons. I mean, it's super fast in terms of impact on learning time. So one problem with the assessment situation is the time you spend assessing is time you're not spending in actually other meaningful learning. The second thing about it is it's computer adapted, so the questions change as students get questions right or wrong. So it allows for a kind of streamlining of the data and a little more precise pinpointing of where students are in terms of their level of mastery. The results are immediate, so there's no grading or anything like that. It's all done on the computer. It's a common thing that we're now able to use K-8. We actually started this at the middle school and then kind of rolled it back. the way the reporting cranks out the other side, it helps us get a little handle on where kids are with regard to state assessments, kind of how it's predictive of how things are going to go on the MCAS, if nothing else changed, right? It is used throughout the United States. And so there's national norming as well, and we really think it's helpful because it also checks this box in terms of literacy screening under the law. It doesn't meet all the requirements of the literacy law, but it also has the math component, so it was a nice trade-off there. So that is that. Oh, do my own clicking here. And just this is the timeline. You know, we started 2017, 2018 with a little pilot group at the middle school, expanded kind of year over year at the middle school, and then really launched K-5 21 and 22. The first year we were fully back from the pandemic. As an attempt to kind of get a handle on where are we, and to provide teachers with more immediate tools for adjusting instruction, and particularly more immediate tools for thinking about students who we might need to scoop in for intervention. Okay. Year one, we really just did a lot of educator training, tried to get the students used to the assessment, the teachers used to the assessment. Year two, last year, was really looking at the data. You know, what can we do with this? How do we use it? And this year, we're really starting to do outreach to families, and we want to kind of loop more people in so families know, you know, what is this thing that we're doing and what's it all about. This is in context. I just wanted to say it's important to note that there is no perfect assessment tool out there. Nobody should ever look at one test about anything and make assumptions about a child and what they understand or don't. And so we really use this in a much wider context. We have a whole battery of K-5 literacy assessments. And I'm not going to click into that right now, but it's live it'll be live when we post. And it shows this real array of different types of tools we use to get a handle, especially on kids' reading skills in the early grades. K-5 math assessments. We also have pre and post assessments that are more unit-based that we use. MCAS is a really powerful tool. The problem with it is we only get those results once a year. And then honestly, at the end of the day, I think the thing that we use the most regularly is the stuff that goes on in the classroom. You know, classroom assignments, assessments, homework assignments, things like that are really giving us kind of day-to-day feedback about student learning. Sorry. All right. So this is kind of a sample of what the report looks like that went to families, and this is the sample reading report. This is not a sample from our district. It's like a mock sample that the company produces. And it has a few sections on it. And you can see, you know, up top there's a scaled score, and it puts students in sort of a benchmark bucket to see where are they in terms of progress toward mastery. That's at the top. And then down below, the domain scores really look at the estimate of mastery and skills. It is important to note these two different buckets don't quite match up necessarily, which is kind of confusing, but there's a neat little like scanner guide for families to go in. And we've also told people, if you have any questions about what's really happening with your kiddo or find this difficult, give us a call. We'll help walk you through it. So thank you. Another report for our kids who are not reading enough yet to take the assessment. So in order to have a reading assessment, you have to read some stuff. And so there's this sort of pre-reading assessment called the early literacy assessment that has a lot more sort of visual components to it. We use that with kindergarten and into grade 1, and we sort of make a transition in grade 1 into the reading piece. It has different components to it, so the report looks a little bit different. The company doesn't have a very good model for that that I could put up here, but I listed out. It's got all this different information for folks who are wondering how things are going with the little folks as they're developing these foundational skills. Okay. Some of the limits, you know, I mentioned this, but I'll talk about it in a little more detail. STAR really focuses on what they call focus skills only. These are things that can be assessed by asking a kind of multiple choice type question, which really limits kind of what you can actually test. But in that format, we're able to get a quick snapshot of where are things that are coming up where we might need to dig deeper. So it is helpful for that. We have to use other tools to assess a lot of types of student learning. So anything about mathematical reasoning, like how is it the kids are thinking about problem solving, that's not going to come up on STAR. There's not multi-step problem solving in a lot of it. It doesn't do much analysis of more complex tasks or texts, and it definitely doesn't do anything with writing. So it's really just one among many things that we're looking at. And then looking ahead, the middle school timeline, we're going to start sending those reports out as well. Not doing them in the fall has to do a little bit with the timing of when they're doing their reports. And the second bullet, which is I'm hoping by the time we send that, we can figure out how to do it electronically, so we're not sending out all these reams of paper. And then the goal is really to sort of, by next year, normalize this, so every fall, every June, parents can just expect this comes home. We may end up doing it with conferences, or we may do it just with report cards or in the mail or something. We'll kind of get the dates ironed out. But this is our first launch out into the parent universe. We'll see what questions come up. Hope to help people get used to getting this, and then we'll make it a routine. So that's it.
Any question?
So is this just a district tool, or is this being used statewide?
It's used throughout the country. It's not a state mandated tool. It's one of a number of different tools that different districts might use or opt to use. And for us, it's one of an array of different tools that we use internally.
And was there something that prompted us to start using it in whenever?
I'd say there are kind of two things. One is coming off of the pandemic and really thinking about how do we get a sense of where students are at and not wait around for the MCAS results, which would be the other sort of more widely normed tool. But the second piece, there's a change in the law and state regulations around dyslexia screening, and we really wanted to make sure we were kind of throwing a lot of robust tools at early identification if there are students who are struggling with those foundational reading skills, so we could quickly get students support that they need. And this is a piece of that puzzle. It's not the whole piece, but it's a piece.
Yep.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Are these reports sent to a state level? Are they shared publicly
No.
for comparison?
No.
And are the results, it seems like the results are much more individualized, meaning you're identifying specific students who may need additional support, or do you also, I mean, is it possible to use the results on sort of a more macro level and look at the curriculum? And
There are district-wide reports. It's interesting, on the curriculum front, I think we could get a sense of if we're wobbly in any sort of foundational skill development,
Yeah.
but like I said, it doesn't do a lot of higher order stuff, so it's got some limits as a curriculum assessment tool.
Yeah.
It'd be more, are you the kind of tiers of support in place working the way they're supposed to work? I think that's really
Right.
more what this is good at.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Allison.
All right. See, I got through that.
No. Thanks, and that's what I have for the superintendent's report this evening.
Okay. A public participation. As a reminder, members of the public who want to participate are welcome to come forward. Members have up to 3 minutes to participate. Per our policy, the school committee does not respond to any comments. And if you do want to participate, just come forward and state your name and address. Is there any member of the public who would like to participate today? Okay. Seeing none, we can move on to school committee chair update, liaison reports. I'll just start. I have a couple small updates. First, for the community, our next, for those of you who haven't participated, we have about 4 times a year what we call school committee roundtables, which is opportunities for to connect with Allison, Tim, and 2 school committee members in a much more informal back and forth. And being this a public meeting, we can't obviously do that here, but we've implemented this, I think, 3 years ago, and it's really gotten good feedback. The next meeting is going to be on Friday, January 12th at 9 a.m. Location will either be in the high school conference room or it'll be in the PD room. So mark your calendars, and we'll send out, as we've done in the past, send out an email about a week before reminding people and also asking for any questions that people want to submit ahead of time. Second piece of just more for the general public, that there is a special town meeting on Wednesday, the 17th of January. It's 6:30, I think, in the auditorium next door. There's no school topics, but there is the biggest article is asking for design funding for a new fire station. I think a few of us attended PTOs, and people recently were surprised they hadn't heard about this. So I'd encourage people to attend and get educated. It's obviously an important topic for just a town-wide town meeting. So just a reminder of that. So that's all I had. Other reports?
I have a Pine Hill update. So we are still on track for substantial completion in early January and moving everybody in over February break. And as we get closer to that, those dates get more and more real. So we're still knocking on wood, but it's looking good. Once the building is done, we are going to offer a day of community tours. So anybody can just come and walk through the building, and we'll have people on hand to sort of talk about, you know, special things about it, the design, answer any questions. So we'll be announcing that date shortly. We just want to make sure everyone in town gets the chance to see it if they want to see it. This will probably be before we move everybody, just to save everyone from that. And finally, in really great news, so I think we've mentioned a lot that during this whole process, particularly when we went out to bid, we were hit with, you know, incredibly high construction costs and all kinds of costs that we weren't anticipating when the project started. The MSBA recognized that and has responded and basically looked at the 30 or so projects that were in the pipeline at that time, during that time of this exponential growth in construction costs, and has awarded additional funds. And Westwood has received an additional $3.75 million in reimbursement funds. So we will be getting that just as we have been getting the other reimbursements. That brings the total reimbursement amount from the MSBA to about $22 million. All of this additional money will go toward reducing the debt that we have to take. So it's going straight to reducing the impact on taxpayers. And we are very thankful to the MSBA. We're thankful to all of the state representatives who pushed for this, who advocated for this for us. And we're very thrilled to announce that. So great news in the project. And we are still under budget. So again, knocking on wood. But so far so good. So we'll see. Hopefully in January, at our January meeting, I will say we are at substantial completion. So we'll see.
Thank you, ma'am.
Awesome. Thank
There
you,
is
Maria.
a lot of chatter. I don't know if you're hearing it too about the playground. The
Oh,
kids
the
are like,
playground is up.
yeah, the kids are already have observed that
The
and are
playground
excited
is up.
too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it looks fantastic. And we actually had an inspection. The PBC had an inspection on Tuesday, and many of them used the slide. They tested the slide out.
It wasn't just the slide.
No, it wasn't.
For the record.
The
I was
slide
not one of them, but
Yeah,
but
the
yeah.
slide was the topic of conversation, but yes, it looks fantastic. I should have gotten pictures, but I
And
didn't.
it's night, they have the lights on at night, and it looks so pretty, and
Yeah.
it looks great.
Yeah, I mean,
exciting.
it's almost done. Very exciting.
Thank you, ma'am. Joanna, did you want to?
I did. I wanted to give a planning board liaison report, just to update the rest of the committee. On December 5th, the planning board approved an application for mixed-use multifamily residential building at 22 Everett. You guys might know this as the Tumble Bus Lot. It's a residential building with 160 units of a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. Back in October, Tony, Tim, Lemma, myself, and Elijah Rumlis, the town planner, all met with the developer to talk through the implication that this project would have on our schools and the numbers that they're projecting, and just talking through how this will look for our town. At that time, they had estimated through the way that they come up with all of their numbers, through a kind of fiscal impact study. They had predicted about 28 students would come to our district through this project. Now that number is up to 29. And then during that conversation, we talked about what concessions or what, kind of provisions could be put into place should that number be drastically off. They were confident in their numbers, and the town is confident in their numbers, but yet we wanted to sort of trust but verify. We had discussed a variety of options. One of the things we talked about, for example, was putting some money into escrow. Ultimately, the planning board agreed for a provision in the application, and I just want to read it so I get it right. The developer will notify Westwood Public Schools as soon as the residential occupancy reaches 95%. Westwood School Department will certify them to the applicant the actual number of school-aged children who are registered to attend, who have a home address at the property. And in the event that that number is above 29, the applicant will pay, tender to the town of Westwood a one-time payment of $10,000 per student in excess of 29 students. So it's, there was no legal requirement for the town to ask for that, and it was a concession that we are pleased to have secured.
Great.
And is this the development that will meet the state requirement to have housing near the MBTA?
Yes, yes. Although for like all the nitty-gritty details on that, please like refer to the planning board for the details. I have
Wait
stuff.
till town meeting in May on that.
All right.
Great, thank you for, I know the planning board meetings are not brief, but thank you for staying on top of.
I don't attend the entire
Yes,
time for
okay,
all of the
yes.
things, but I was,
thank you for
you know,
doing that.
very interested in this particular project, given the impact that it could have on our schools. So,
Thank you for that. Any other updates? Okay. I think now we're going to move on to discussion items, starting with the fiscal '25 budget.
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, we're in a situation where there's not a whole lot of detail, and I know I had shared this with the committee over email on Friday, where we're not going to be talking with any sort of specificity around where we stand with the FY25 budget tonight. You know, Tony and I and Lemma, I want to acknowledge Lemma's work and support in the room as well. You know, we continue to meet with town officials. We have another meeting scheduled next week regarding trying to figure out sort of where we're going to land with FY25. But at this point, we do not yet have enough sort of clarity on where things are going to sit with the operating budget, again, to present anything with specificity. I do have, as I wrote to you, concerns about whether or not, given the timeliness of the conversation, the scheduling of our January 11th meeting, whether or not we're going to be able to hit that as a date. Certainly, we're going to do all of our efforts, and I know that it's funny, we were talking with somebody, Lem and I, about what's going to happen during the holiday break, and there's a lot of budget going to be happening during the holiday break. So we're going to try to hit that timeline if we can. But I think it's important for the committee to be aware that we may need to develop a contingency date should that not be able to be hit at that timeline. That being said, I mean, I you know, in terms of our own internal processes, we've completed all of our meetings with our cost center leaders, all of our principals and other folks. We are currently compiling, or have compiled sort of the list of all the asks. We're developing sets of what potential scenarios may be. But certainly without sort of a ballpark with where we may land, it would be irresponsible for us to talk about that in a public setting until we have a little more clarity about where that's going to be and what the decision points are. So I wish I had more to share this evening, but at least, you know, in context of both the committee and the general public, I think it was important to provide that update as much as possible this evening, and happy to entertain any questions or comments that you have. And I think a discussion around a contingency plan, I think, may be appropriate. I mean, I'll defer to you on that, Tony, but.
Yeah, so I guess on the calendaring, I know there's some people with vacations, and why don't we take the kind of the calendar offline, because we want to do the budget conversation, obviously the January meeting, ideally with everyone in person. We also have kind of an executive session for security that we want to slot in somewhere in between now and kind of the February break. So we'll work on with Harley kind of on some of these things, you know, given with Lemon what they're and you kind of. So why don't we do kind of the calendaring offline? But if there's other comments, certainly welcome those.
Not much to say.
Well, I appreciate that. So we'll move forward. So I'm going to ask Amy to come down and join us if she can, Amy Davenport. So one of the things that's on the agenda today, and I just want to acknowledge we've kind of touched on this a couple of times, but I wanted to address it head on with a little more specificity this evening around concerns that I've heard raised both in this forum and in other forums around the process for substituting at the high school in terms of how that relates to student privileges, and sort of talk about that in context. Before I turn it over to Amy to talk about some of the history of sort of how this happened, I do want to acknowledge the fact that there is a challenge not just here in this district, but across the Commonwealth. I hear this from my colleagues all the time about having enough substitutes to cover what we have. We also hear about not having enough actual full-time teachers to cover what the positions are that are out there as well too. So I want to acknowledge that part of where we are is based upon the fact that when we do have substitutes, we will prioritize them for our younger students who, by the nature of their age and what they do, require a greater level of direct supervision And so I just want to frame that from a district perspective before I turn it over to Amy to talk about some specifics. So with that, Amy, the floor is yours.
Sure. So I thought I'd start with some context, which unfortunately predates COVID. So I'm going to dredge up some painful memories about the time of school closure and hybrid. Prior to COVID, I would say we were already dealing with a sort of dwindling pool of substitute teachers. And I can't speak to what caused that. Anecdotally, it felt like a lot of retirees who were once interested in covering a few classes in their subject area, we had to deploy very differently so that they could cover for multiple teachers across multiple disciplines. And so I'd clarify that the substitute teaching role at the high school does not provide instruction. It's an adult who supervises and ensures safety and does their best to implement teacher subplans with fidelity without being a licensed trained teacher. And the fewer substitutes we had, the harder they had to work because they had to cover for multiple absences across the building. And so we'd be looking to see which teachers were teaching which blocks, how we could plug that adult into as many blocks as possible. When we were unable to cover all classes, which happened with increasing frequency prior to COVID, we would consolidate classes and send them to the cafeteria to be supervised by that substitute in that space for that block. When teachers report that they are not going to be in school for sick day reasons, for personal day reasons, they use our teacher management system. It's called Frontline. It has the ability to include clear instructions for a substitute, or at that time it was often the department chair, about what the students should be doing in class at that time. When we pivoted during COVID to more remote learning, we got much better at communicating digitally with students about work we could not do with them. And as a result, that became the vehicle for communicating subplans to students. So we use Google Classroom primarily as our learning management classroom. There are a few teachers who use Canvas, but almost every teacher in the high school uses Google Classroom. And that became the way to communicate to students what to do when teachers weren't with them. The other thing that was true pre-COVID was that we had a different rotating block schedule where 7 classes met per day and 1 class dropped each day. Instructional blocks were shorter. They were 47 minutes long, with the exception of the lunch block, which was about an hour long. Any questions so far? Okay. During COVID, as you remember, staff absences increased both in frequency and in duration, primarily because of quarantine requirements. And we also had a very different block schedule where we did not serve lunch, and the cafeteria was converted into a very large study hall for that entire year. We also had some real restrictions that required us to open up campus at that time because we literally didn't have space for all of the students who were unscheduled during their free blocks. So at that time, the district did a review of how we were providing substitutes across all levels and shifted to a building-based substitute model so that there were fewer people coming in and out of the building at that time, and so that we had a guaranteed consistent body. At the high school, we had 2 building-based subs that year. They were either in that cafeteria space providing supervision to all students, or we deployed one of them particularly to our special education classrooms to ensure that student services were met during that time of disruption. Following COVID, we came back with a different schedule and a different substitute teacher model. And that's what you are hearing more about and we're living with today. The first change was that we moved to a rotating 5-block-a-day schedule and hour-long classes each day. That has been an amazing change in terms of teaching and learning. It does have an impact, though, on how students experience an absent teacher. Because there are fewer classes meeting each day and classes are longer, if 2 teachers are absent that day, that constitutes a 2-hour chunk of the student's day, and there are only 5 academic classes meeting that day. So the impact feels bigger, if that makes sense. The other change that happened was we moved to 1 building-based substitute, and that's the funding that I have for coverage in my budget. That building-based substitute does two things. They supervise students, primarily ninth graders, who are not scheduled in class during their free blocks in a study in the cafeteria. And they also supervise any student, 9th or 10th grade, whose teacher is absent that day. Our juniors and our seniors who have open campus privileges are not required to report to the cafeteria when their teachers are absent unless they do not have privileges, which can be a function of attendance, behavior, or achievement. Absent teachers, like I said, are now sharing their work directly with students via Google Classroom, and the expectation is that students will use their time either during that regularly scheduled class or at another time to complete that work prior to the next day. I think it probably would be helpful for me to also clarify that we have some classrooms that do not require substitute coverage in the cafeteria, either because there's an instructional assistant in the room or because we're able to deploy our instructional coaches at the high school and sometimes our department chairs to cover those classes. And we're probably capable of covering about a third of our absences during any given day by redeploying the people who are sort of positioned best to support those classrooms. The other thing that I should probably clarify is just what our privilege structure looks like, because that's related here. And the privilege structure has always existed since I've been here, but has definitely evolved over time. Pretty much every student in the 9th, 10th, and 11th grade has one semester where they have a free block. The other semester, they are taking their full academic course load and meeting requirements in wellness, public speaking, and civics. During that unscheduled free block, which rotates throughout the day, if they are sophomores, they may arrive one block late when that class is first and leave one block early when that class is last. Juniors may leave at any time that that class is meeting, except for during S block where they are scheduled into an anchor room, and seniors may leave even during S block. So that's what we do. Let me tell you a little bit about what other people do, because when I learned I would be presenting, I thought it would be really helpful to provide context beyond Westwood. So I am a part of a job-alike group of principals in the area. I sent a quick questionnaire to them, and 14 of my colleagues responded. That was Franklin, Hopkinton, Hudson, Mansfield, Medfield, Medway, Milford, Millis, Needham, Norwood, Oliver, Ames, Walpole, Wayland, and Weston. 12 of those 14 schools require absent teachers to provide subplans. The other 2 do not. 11 of the 14 reported that they have a huge challenge in finding the appropriate substitute coverage in their school. Hopkinton, Oliver, Ames, Needham, Weston, and Wayland employ identical systems to Westwood. There are slight variations in who has to report to the cafeteria, or the library is sometimes a place where students are supervised, but they have an identical model. The difference sometimes lies in how many adults they have available to supervise big groups of students. Most of those peer districts have more than one building-based sub. Medway and Mansfield employ similar systems to us, although Mansfield also allows daily substitutes to come, which is something that we don't budget for. And Medway is sometimes able to redeploy staff who are scheduled for other duties to provide coverage. I will also just say, across those 14 districts, there are 5 budgeted but currently vacant building-based sub positions. So I thought that was good context. What questions do you have for me that I didn't get to in all that information?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for presenting that. I think there's a lot to sort of digest there.
Yeah.
And you know, I would just tag one other thing, right? Is that the and again, this is a conversation I know you've had with your colleagues. I've had with in the principal world. I've had with my colleagues in the superintendent world. Is that sort of the relationship with people and when they're not feeling well and coming to work has changed, and that's not just a school thing. You know, we used to tell people, you know, suck it up and fight through it and come, and that's after, you know, that the societal norms around that and school-based norms for a whole bunch of reasons have changed. And so that has increased the level of absenteeism that we see as well. And so I just want to, I think that's one piece I just wanted to add to the context of what Amy shared. But
Yeah.
Certainly have, go ahead.
And I would also add to, a lot of our teachers are parents. And they're not only dealing with the fact that they are no longer able to come to work coughing all over everybody, but their children can't go to school anymore when they are coughing all over everybody, which I think you can probably all relate to. So I think it's compounded by the caregiver role that a lot of our staff provide.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, it is a contractual right. Teachers have sick days; they're entitled to them. I think one of the challenges, if you're trying to make comparisons with, for example, the corporate world, there may be lots of times where people may be able to work remotely. That's not the case in schools, right? There's some things you can do, but you can't have direct instruction with a room of kids in front of you without some level of supervision. That creates the challenge that we have right now. So,
And just to be clear on all these other competitors, nobody's got a physics teacher calls in sick at 7 a.m. None of these schools have a physics person, somebody coming in to do instruction. Is that,
No.
okay, that's, I just want to be clear.
That
We're
is
talking about
very clear.
supervision, not about instruction.
And I think that's the point that confuses a lot of parents, right? Is that you think, well, why can't we get more substitutes? Because in your head, you're thinking, well, they can come in and teach the kids, but you can't find a substitute to do AP US history, right? And you can't find a substitute. It's very difficult. So really, it's at the high school level, which is different from the elementary level. It's much more just watching the kids in a room, and whether that's in their classroom or it's in the cafeteria, it's almost irrelevant. And it also is really up to the kids to take the Google Classroom assignment and do it. And to your point, they can either do it then or they'll do it that night, but at some point they have to do it. So,
Yes, I mean, I know that the cafeteria is not a classroom setting. It's a collaborative space. It's a place where you can get a snack. There are seats. There's a service to work in. It's not a substitute for being in the classroom. Part of the function of the privilege system is to make sure that the students who are in the cafeteria are safely supervised, which would be challenging for one adult to do if every student who was unscheduled was required to go to the cafeteria. I would also just say, I think it would be hard to make students feel really good about the work they were doing in school if for more than one block in one day, they were required to be in the cafeteria for 2 hours. Yep. I think it would just be really challenging. I think it would result in a lot of pushback in terms of our positive school culture, and I think it would result in a lot of disciplinary challenges and a lot of skipped study, which I think would be very hard to sort of like enforce with some real consequences. So it's hard to sort of chase down what we would do differently within this model that would work for kids and kind of honor their efforts and time too. It's tricky.
So obviously, I mean, from what I've heard from parents, which I completely understand, there's a lot of concern that students are in and out of school for extended chunks of the day.
Yeah.
Or they're just not going to school because from what I'm hearing, they could have potentially like 3 blocks. So maybe if their schedule lined up in such a way, they could have like 3 hours during the day, maybe where they don't have something. So are the other districts that you looked at, or any of them looking into any creative solutions? Like, I don't know. It would obviously have to have a lot to do with bargaining, but if there are teachers that are well in the building, if they would, be interested in earning stipends or something to take on an additional class during the day. Or I'm just wondering if anybody's has any sort of creative ideas, because I think it is concerning that there are kids that have that much time during the day.
Yeah, I can speak to kind of 2 things there. I think I did do like a very snapshot data dive. We had a lot of classroom staff members who were not here on Tuesday. We had 9 teachers absent. And so I pulled the data to see what was the impact on the student body, how many students had that much free time as a result of this situation. And so we had almost 480 students who had at least 1 teacher absent that day when 9 classroom teachers were absent. Of those 480 students, which is more than half of our school, we were able to provide coverage for about 130 of them, where they just reported to the classroom and they were with either an instructional assistant, a department chair, or an instructional coach. For the remaining 276 kids, there were 57 who had more than 1 teacher absent that day. There were 55 students who had 2 teachers absent that day, 17 of them were seniors who are also free S block, and the others were sophomores and juniors. I think there were a few ninth graders who had like an orchestra teacher in a mixed level class absent, but those were the only ninth graders that were impacted. And I looked at the attendance of all of those students, and I couldn't see a noticeable impact in that attendance. I had 2 students who were dismissed at lunch block of all of those kids who were impacted. I do think that students report to their families that all of their teachers are absent or only one of their teachers is going to be there, and we receive phone calls like that, but when we look at their schedules, that's not entirely an accurate representation of their schedule. So I always encourage our parents to use Aspen and to look at all the things that are happening in a kid's day. But I recognize that that impact is still very real and that I don't have a teacher there who can provide actual instruction. If we were to look at a model where we had more skilled people there, like our currently employed teachers, I think it's not necessarily a contract issue, but it is definitely a budget issue, which is your purview. But it's possible to provide coverage as a duty, and our schedule isn't very helpful in that regard because most of our teachers only have 1 prep block every day because of the rotating 5x7. So that's an option that we've looked at, but it doesn't provide enough equitable coverage to have an impact for students. And so then the only solutions would mean paying for coverage.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that too, because not only is there a budgetary impact, there's also a reduction in educational efficacy impact, because that's time when teachers may be preparing for their instruction with students that you're now taking away from that preparation to supervise, right? And so there is a classroom impact in that model as well.
Sean, do you have any views on this topic? This is a hot topic.
Absolutely. I think for me at least, it's seldom that I have more than 1 free day. So either that be a teacher absence or as some people have mentioned, having the 3 in a row. And even when those things occur, you're still accountable as a student to make up any work that the teacher assigns. And for many of us with busy schedules, sometimes it is a little bit of a relief to just have 2 hours or 3 hours where you can go home early, take care of other work you may have across jobs, extracurriculars, and ultimately most students, when they have a teacher absence, end up just in a group space like in the cafeteria or library naturally. Students don't tend to leave during the middle of the day, even as seniors or juniors. So even if the efficiency of the work they're getting done is a little bit less, it's still a nice break that's baked into the middle of the schedule.
Other questions?
I did want to know, and Tim, you alluded to this, do we have data on how much teacher absenteeism has increased
So
over trends?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Unfortunately, no, we don't have clean, clear data around that. There's 2 reasons for that. One, we actually do have to report teacher attendance data to DESE. DESE chooses at this point not to publish that data, so it's not like we can look at in the same kind of way we can look at student attendance data through DESE. The other thing is through our reporting systems right now, because we don't have an HR director, and I'm going to come back to that piece again too, we don't really have a clean, clear system to be able to differentiate what is sort of the normal day-to-day absenteeism versus somebody who may have a long-term extended medical leave where we're able to bring in a long-term sub, which does not have the same impact of the conversation we're having here. So not sort of any meaningful data. But again, anecdotally, you see it, I see it, and we hear it from our colleagues and counterparts in other districts as well.
So, and didn't you say a lot of the teachers also have children? Last meeting we were talking about how student absenteeism is also up for whatever amount of, reasons. I wonder if there's some correlation there too.
Yeah, the other thing that's hard about the data is that all of my employees are listed as high school staff members, and as I said before, we always provide coverage for special education teachers who are absent, and so it would be very hard to look at the classroom teacher data and then pull the people who are not actually classroom teachers, as well as our support staff, our school psychologists, our guidance counselors, whose absences are felt in different ways, but not directly in the classroom. So it's really hard to disaggregate the data without a person who is doing that. And there was something else somebody asked, but now I've lost the thread. Sorry. The one thing that we are constantly talking about is creating additional electives offerings with the hopes of wooing students out of their unscheduled blocks into more electives classes. And so that's, I'd say, like an unconventional strategy that we're trying to employ to reduce unscheduled time. SBlock has made it, I'd say, easier for students to take more classes and know that they'll still have a baked-in time in their day to get extra help and get their work done. So that's something else that we're trying on. I would say that most of the peer districts who I talked to who are brainstorming are thinking about how to increase pay for daily substitutes as a strategy because, as Tony said, they are kind of our competitors. And if Dover is paying a lot more for their building-based sub or daily sub, then I won't have one. So that is honestly the only strategy that peer districts have been talking about.
One other question. I don't know how often this happens. How often do planned absence? In other words, I know my sister's getting married, so on Friday, and I can put a test in that day that someone can proctor. Does that happen much or not?
We do have teachers who are impacted by family events, weddings, stuff like that. When we can piece together coverage, if somebody needs to leave early for travel, we really do have a nice culture where people just cover for one another. I will say that because no events happened during COVID, we definitely have had an influx of requests like that on Fridays. Oh, that's the other thing that I was going to tell you. We did actually budget for an additional day of coverage. I have 2 building-based subs who split the week, and I have 2 of them in the building on Friday. And so we have been deploying her when we have 2 people into classrooms to further reduce the impact because the Fridays are just uniquely impacted by obligations that are not always sickness, but are very real for our staff.
I would say our contract is actually has some nice parameter setting that I don't think every contract has out there in the universe, where first 10 days of school, last 10 days of school, before and after holidays and things like that are somewhat restricted for personal leave. And I think because those are key times where just there's a lot going on at the school, sometimes there are times that are harder for some of our students too, just they're emotional, and trying to keep as many of our professional staff there is helpful. And teachers and staff in general are really respectful of that. People will ask for an exception if they have a major life event, and we're generally pretty good about honoring that. But I think folks are also really good about knowing, there are these times a year that are critical and we need to be here. So it's a nice culture.
Yeah, and we very rarely will ask people who might be doing professional days to move them if we look at the day and there's just no way. But generally, when people need to take time, they take it.
Yeah. I have 2 more questions. So you, just to clarify, so you have the 2 building-based subs, but are they each part-time? So is it like 1 FTE? Okay, all right.
Correct. So it's this year we teased it up to 1.2.
1.2, okay.
And I don't think people noticed. So, and I only say that to say, on that Tuesday where I did the deep dive, I had 6 teachers who were teaching F block that day who were absent. And so for people to really feel that coverage, I would need 6 people. And so getting that extra 0.2 is awesome. It is not an all-encompassing solution to even add a full-time second building-based sub.
Thank you, and thank you for all of this information. My last question is, do you think that that our Boston students may be impacted more than Westwood students because it might be more difficult for them to come to school later? So like if they know that they have an hour or 2 in the morning, they may not be as inclined to come to school because they can't get there easily.
I think it would depend on whether or not they were relying on district-provided transportation to get here. Okay. I'd have to look at that data, and I'd want to ask them.
Okay.
I would say anecdotally, I don't notice a stronger correlation among any particular subset of students with their attendance and their staff's attendance. I mean, we learned from COVID, like school only works when we're all here together. So I would never say that like it's wonderful as it is. And so we're just trying to deal in tricky realities.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you want me to look into anything else, I'm happy to take the homework and get back to you.
Sure, if you're desperate, Tim would come and monitor 15-year-olds.
You're laughing. It's not. It has definitely happened before.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done it before in my former life, so.
I
yeah.
did have one more question, or comment, I would say, because I don't know that you have the answer, and I don't know that we have the answer, but I would like to take it up as a thing that we can explore, is this relationship, if one exists, between teacher absenteeism and student absenteeism. Because I think we should be looking under every rock to understand why our student absenteeism has increased. So if there is a correlation, let's take that charge to look into it and figure that out, if we can.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd say I think it's really important to think about how to improve everybody's attendance beyond like strategies to address it, right? Like we want people to be here and feel really supported while they're here, and that's true of the adults and the kids.
Yeah, I would echo that as well too, and just for the very simple reason that the adults in a building role model the behavior for students, right? And so saying that explicitly, acknowledging that explicitly, whether or not the data shares it or not, there is a perception related to that I think is important to fully acknowledge.
And I will say, just to kind of validate what you just said, I hope you don't mind if I share this, but at the last legislative council meeting that I attended, there was a lengthy discussion about school culture, and one of the really, I thought, intriguing things that the students said was there was a school spirit day at some point in the fall, and that they noticed that not a lot of students dressed up, but the teachers did. And there was commentary that, wasn't it so great that the teachers dressed up, and it like made the students feel like they're into it, like they're into the culture building, like we should be into the culture building. And so that, even that role modeling of school spirit is meaningful, I think, to the students.
Guys.
Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to action items. The first action item is approval of the November 16, 2023 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? None. The vote is unanimous. Next is approval of the WIP PTO donation.
Preschool.
Oh, the preschool.
Preschool.
What am I looking at? I'm like integrated preschool. I was like, took me a second. Sorry, the integrated preschool PTO donation. Do I have a motion to approve the acceptance of the donation?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? None. Thank you to the
Thank
actually
you.
the PTO. That
Yeah,
was
that
was it
was
10,000? Almost
$10,783 for playground equipment.
That
That's
was
awesome.
Yeah, that's a round of applause for that.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yes, thank you.
Not just this year, and they're sitting over there, so we're very, very excited.
Thank
And
you.
we know that stuff isn't cheap, so thank you for raising so much money.
This spring, we can see how many of you can sit on the back.
Thank
Go
you.
breaking it already.
Thank you, that's amazing, great. Finally, the final action item is approval of the fiscal 25 preschool tuition rates. You want to say anything about
Yeah,
this?
I
briefly,
can
Tim?
just say, we had done a, and I feel bad actually saying this right after we just accepted the donation, but, so we had built in a 3% increase last year. I think it's, instead of going through this thing where we don't change and then you might have spikes, I think it's better moving forward to just kind of build in, unless there is a particular reason to modify, just build in a normal increase on an annual basis. So you can see the FY '25 tuition increase is just designed to be a 3% increase over FY '24.
Do I have a motion to approve the preschool tuition rates for fiscal year 2025?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None. The vote is unanimous. Finally, any new business from anyone? All right, great. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.